Okay.
Yeah, I'm trying to add people.
Yeah, perfect. Cool. Let's move on then. First thing that we'll do is an icebreaker. Surprise, surprise. I don't think it's a surprise, but yeah, that's what people do on meetings. So, Mike, over to you. Let's see what you prepared for us.
Cool. All right. Thanks, everybody. So we're just going to keep it nice and simple for today, just to get everyone engaged a little bit and hear a little bit from everyone else that's on the call. So what I'm going to be doing is chucking a link into the chat. You should be able to access that right away. This is our first time doing this, so please let me know if it doesn't work, but it should be fairly straightforward. All we're going to do is ask you the question of what does agility mean to you? Obviously, our meetup title has agility in its title. It's do things differently with agility. So we'd like to get your feelings in a word. What does agility really mean? And then what we're going to do is form a word cloud out of that and have a look at it and see what words come up. So if everyone hopefully can get into that, I will share another screen. And we will see what answers we get. Hopefully everyone can see that. All right, and everyone does get two chances. So you can mess up the first time or do something really risky. That's up to you. So while I'm sharing this screen, I've just noticed I've lost the participants tab. So if someone else, Amy or Christina, you could just keep an eye out for me to add people in. Thank you. Cool. So we've got a lot of cool words popping in already. Problem solving, flexibility, better, faster, try and learn, creativity, open mind. Nice. Ooh, directional. That's an interesting choice. I like that. Cool. So if anyone's having trouble getting into that link or hasn't been able to add your words, let me know. Oh, you got it.
Some of these one words are suspiciously too wordy.
Yeah, so I actually did allow for 2 words, but one of those is 3 words though, which has confused me even more. But I allowed for 2 words because when you say 1 word, lots of people always try and get cheeky and do 2. So I figured I'd see what happens.
I just learned something. I didn't know that you could do that with Mentimeter. Because usually
cool,
if
right?
I put like 2 words, like it just separate them. So I was trying to think for just one. Nice. I like it.
Cool. All right. Well, so we've got a nice word cloud there. Please keep adding words if you haven't already. So when we're done with the meetup, we will chuck this on LinkedIn to just kind of share a little bit of what everyone else has included. If anyone would like to jump in now and share any thoughts on what we're seeing here, feel free to do so. I'll just give it a minute and we'll have a look at this, and then otherwise we'll move on shortly. Cool. I think we've got probably most of the submissions that we're going to get. So thank you everybody for that. So I'm going to stop sharing. I will put this up on LinkedIn later. So if you haven't put your words in yet, feel free to do that later, because I'd love to get everyone involved in sharing this around and seeing what agility means to everyone.
I just wanted to say, I found something very interesting. I saw like what agility means to you, and someone put agility. So agility means agility, right? So what are these questions? Oh my, come on.
You can tell who the right brain thinkers are in the group, right?
Yes. Yeah. That was a nice one. Cool. Okay. I just realized that because Mike shared, my screen stopped. Let me just share again. Okay, that was a very quick icebreaker. I hope it was obviously useful to see some of the words. Again, like as Mike said, like he'll post it later on. So we'll just gain more words. Saying that, let's just have a look of topics for today. So speakers, like we already introduced Mike, I will just go to Amy. Amy, do you want to say what you will speak about today and something about you?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm going to be talking about why Agile Delivery is not sprinting. that's a fairly facetious way of saying what I'm talking about is language and how we use language, and how some of the words we use with Agile maybe could use a little bit more thought, because they maybe don't convey. There are nuances maybe that get lost. So that's what I'm going to be talking about.
Nice. That would be nice to hear. So we'll start with Mike, who will be speaking about the tale of two teams. I don't know if we mentioned how team culture can make or break Scrum. There will be some time for Q&A. Then we'll have a quick break because we realized that there are two talks, so maybe people will need a comfy break. And then Amy will be speaking just about what she just mentioned. Then we'll have a Q&A for her session as well. Then we'll have some feedback speaking about the next meetup, and we'll just wrap it up, if that's fine with everyone. And moving to Mike.
Cool. Thank you, Christina. All right, so I guess I can jump into it. I'm just going to try and share my screen again. Hopefully, can everyone see that? Love it. All right, cool. So thank you all. This is going to be the first time I'm doing this talk. So like I say, at the end, we'll do a bit of a Q&A. I'm happy to answer any questions, but I'd also love feedback on the talk itself, whether it was useful, if there's any stuff that you'd like me to expand upon. I'm sure I'll be using this talk again in the future. But today I'm going to be telling you a tale of two teams. And if I can make my slides change. So here to tell you a story. And the background information that you need is that this story is about Vital Technologies. They're one of those big international businesses that's building lots of cool stuff, software, hardware, lots of teams, lots of countries, and they just do lots of really interesting things. But at this particular point in time, as our story starts, they have two teams that are in need of a Scrum Master. They've been struggling lately to get things done. They know that they're not really doing Scrum or not doing Scrum particularly well, and so they want an experienced Scrum Master to come in and give them a hand to get things going and get the ball rolling on their Agile journey. And so the main character in our story today is going to be Gilbert. So Gilbert is a Scrum Master. He's helped lots of teams improve their Scrum practice. He's been doing this for many, many years. So Vital Technologies seems like a good place for him to apply his skills. And he's brought in on a 9-month fixed-term contract, which for Gilbert was a really interesting situation, because it meant he knew he had an end goal in his sights, which was to help these teams to become self-managing at some point before he has to move away. So he knows that he's not going to be here forever. So some of the other key players in this story, we've got Pete, the product owner. So Pete has been here for a very, very long time. So he's been with this organization almost since the beginning. But really, he's just kind of a technical lead. So he doesn't know, he doesn't have a huge amount of control over what work gets done. He doesn't get to decide necessarily what the priorities are. He's really just the expert in the platform. And he knows the platform really well, but he's not necessarily the person in charge. And that's where Manny, the manager, comes in. So Manny is the person who everyone else in the organization, in the teams in question, reports to. He does performance reviews. He's responsible for firing and hiring, and he's been here a long time. He's always kind of been in control, and for the most part, when he says that something needs to be done, it gets done. And so the two teams that we're going to be talking about today, that Gilbert's going to be working with, are Team Aqua and Team Ignis. So both of these teams are very, very similar in terms of what they're doing, right? So they're working on the same platform, the same product. They're physically co-located in the same office. All of the organizational constraints that apply generally to either of these teams is going to apply the same way to both of these teams. They're just two different teams working on that same product, same platform. So they share the product owner, Pete. Everyone reports to Manny, and Gilbert is going to be the Scrum Master for both of these teams. And they share a sprint boundary, so they have their sprint reviews together, that sort of thing. So when Gilbert first arrives in the office on his first day and he's getting introduced to the teams, he starts kind of getting a feel for what these teams are like. There's a few things that he starts to notice. So the first thing is that Team Aqua really seems to have all the quote unquote expert developers. So Team Aqua is where everyone who's been with the organization for quite a long time seems to be. So all the developers have been there for many, many years. They know the platform inside and out. They know the product. In many cases, they were responsible for building the product in the form that it's currently in. But interestingly, they don't really seem to talk to each other very, very much. So their side of the office is fairly quiet. They all kind of sit down with their headphones on, getting on with the work. They say that they like to focus on getting stuff done, and they do get a lot done. Another interesting thing about Team Aqua is that Manny really loves them. So Manny, the manager, thinks that Team Aqua are the greatest team there is. When something needs to be done, he can go to them and he'll know that it's going to get done. And in fact, when Gilbert's getting his initial tour and being shown around the office, Manny says to him, you know, Team Aqua is really, really great, because last week we had this bug that we found that really, really needed to get fixed. And one of the developers stayed up until 10 p.m. working on fixing that bug. That's how I know that Team Aqua are really, really great. So Team Ignis, on the other hand, they're still learning the platform. So most of the developers in Team Ignis, because it's only recently been spun up as an extra team to support this platform, they're quite young. Most of them have only been here maybe a year or two. They don't know the platform that well, but they kind of know that they don't know the platform that well. So they talk to each other a lot. They ask a lot of questions. And the interesting thing about their area, where they sit in the office, is it's much more energetic, right? People are moving around desks, they're talking to each other, sometimes shouting to each other, a bit rowdy, but you know, it's clearly got a lot of energy to it. But they know that they don't know everything. And in particular, though, they don't necessarily like being just given tasks and told what to do. And so on Gilbert's first day again, Manny says, you know, sometimes Team Ignis can be a bit problematic. If I come and I say, hey, do this for me, they might say no, or they might ask questions like why, and I don't really like that. I want them to just do what they're told. So really, Team Ignis is probably the team that you should focus on, right? They're the ones that really need your help. So you know, Gilbert says, all right, cool, files that information and gets on with understanding the problem. And so he starts to notice a few patterns before he really gets into coaching. He tries to get the lay of the land, and Gilbert notices a few things. So really the work that's being done is just a mess of Jira tickets that are being managed by Pete. You know, lots of different stories and epics all over the place with no clear idea of priority. And at any given time, work just kind of gets pushed into the teams based on what either Manny or Pete is asking for. And the teams really are just doing zombie Scrum. So they have events called, you know, daily stand-ups and sprint reviews and retrospectives, but it doesn't really look like what Gilbert would consider good Scrum. And so he thinks that's probably something that's going to require a lot of help. But most interestingly, the teams don't really have product increments. So they're not actually creating value for customers in their sprints. They're just working through project milestones and intending to deliver something many, many months from now. So there's no product goal, there's no sprint goals, there's not even a single product backlog. The teams are just working on this stream of tickets, trying to work to some fixed end goal, and fixing a lot of bugs along the way as well. And so Gilbert gets to work coaching. He realizes there's a lot of stuff here that he needs to help solve. And what we're about to tell you now are a collection of the stories, the little coaching moments where Gilbert filed away some information about each of these teams as he was going through this journey. So story number one was helping the teams learn to retrospect. So Gilbert noticed that these teams, every sprint, they were having a retrospective, but they were just getting in a room and doing the same what went well, what didn't go well retrospective that, you know, we've all probably seen a million times. Interestingly, not just the format was the same, but the actual conversations were the same. So nothing was ever really getting fixed. The teams weren't coming up with a plan for change. Every sprint, they were just saying the same problems and the same issues kept coming up in the same way. And so Gilbert says, okay, cool. Let's try changing things up. Let's inject a bit of energy into this, and let's start changing the retro format for these teams. And so Gilbert decides every sprint to prepare a new retro format in a different way to try and encourage a little bit of different thinking in the team. See if we can get them coming up with some new ideas. So, you know, 4Ls and sailboats and radars and bets, lots of different retro formats, just to see what conversation comes up. And so immediately, Team Ignis, they love this idea. They've been bored of just talking about the same problems over and over again. And so experimenting with the way that we're having the retro, they immediately might start experimenting with what they're talking about. So Gilbert notices that they start taking ownership of these conversations. It starts to flow quite naturally, and that they start to come up with actual plans for change in following sprints. That's pretty cool, right? But Team Aqua, on the other hand, Gilbert notices they don't really seem to like this. And so every time a new format is introduced, Team Aqua starts to get a little bit apprehensive. And they still just want to have the same conversations. They still just raise the same issues. And they still don't really want to own anything different. And eventually, this turns into a little bit of a standoff. And so after several retrospectives in this format, Gilbert's setting up a new retro, and the team all enters the room. And one of the developers looks at the board and says, oh, why are we changing this again? Why is the format changing? So Gilbert says, well, we're trying to change it up, make it interesting, keep it fresh. And the developer says, well, this is just ridiculous. I feel like a lab rat. Why does this just change every week? We come in here every week and nothing changes. And Gilbert thinks about that and he says, yeah, you're right. So what are you going to do this week to take ownership to make sure that something changes? And the developer pauses and he says, well, you could try fixing the things that we talked about last week. And Gilbert thinks again and he says, no. What I asked was, what are you going to do to own something to change this week? And again, the developer looks a little bit angry and he gets up and he walks out and he slams the door behind him. So nothing ultimately changed that retro, but Gilbert did learn something and he filed this away. So Team Ignis, it seems, they enjoy change, but Team Aqua, they don't seem to enjoy change and they don't seem to like it. So at least Gilbert's learned something. So moving on to the next problem that Gilbert tries to solve, which is taking control of the work. So like we mentioned, Jira was just this mess of competing work and ideas. There was no real flow to the work that was being done. Some stuff had been in there for months or maybe years even and never been looked at. And whenever teams kind of ran out of work, Pete would just get asked to give them some new work and it would assign out some new tickets to whichever team needed it. But interestingly, the more tickets that were being closed, the better the teams thought that they were doing. And this even included bug fixes, which was a bit strange, right? So the teams were just closing lots and lots of bugs and considering that they were doing a really, really good job. Interesting. And so Gilbert worked with Pete, the product owner, and helped to create a product backlog, proper Scrum product backlog, the kind that's got a product goal and is prioritized and has clear customer outcomes. What a great idea, you'd think. And so the idea was to help the team pull work from the product backlog and deliver particular, sprint goals, customer outcomes. And Team Ignis, immediately they took to this, they liked it. So they understood suddenly what it was the customer wanted and how they could try to build solutions around it. And they started actually refining the backlog, not because they were being directed to, but because they realized that there was an outcome they understood and that they needed to spend some time figuring out what the next lot of work was going to be. And so that kind of flowed naturally to them. Team Aqua, on the other hand, they didn't like this. And so they kept trying to ask that same question, which is, what tickets should we work on? Just give us the tickets to work on. And they weren't able to create sprint goals because the work isn't getting broken down. They didn't really have the ability to do that. And so one day we're in a sprint planning and Gilbert's saying, what are we going to do this sprint? What's our sprint goal going to be? And Team Aqua is just pushing back and saying, no, you just need to tell us the tickets. And Gilbert insists, and Pete, the product owner's in the room as well, and he insists too. And he says, no, we have to decide what's an increment of value that we can deliver this sprint. And after a long, awkward silence, one of the developers, a different developer to the last story, stands up and he says, well, this is ridiculous. We can't even deliver incrementally. That doesn't make any sense with our platform. Okay, that's strange. And then even if we could, the developer exclaims, our customers don't want incremental delivery. They want the thing that we promised them 9 months from now. There's no way that even if we could deliver incrementally, that our customers would even want it. It just doesn't make sense. Well, you should have seen the look on Pete's face because he knew for a fact that this developer had actually never spoken to a customer. So it was interesting to him that the developer was so convinced that he knew what the customer wanted. But interestingly as well, Team Ignis by this point had already started breaking stuff down and delivering incrementally. So we knew it was possible, but Team Aqua didn't really want to hear that. And so again, a problem wasn't really solved, but Gilbert filed away a little something that he learned about these teams. So Team Ignis, they want to deliver incremental value. They understand why that's a good thing, but Team Aqua wants to be given tasks to complete. Okay, so moving on to the next problem. Integrating and collaborating. So now that they're trying to deliver incrementally, now they're trying to get customer value out, the branching strategy that the team is using is starting to become a bit of a problem. So every sprint we're failing to merge work. Every sprint we're having to do a bunch of manual merges of code to make sure that everything's working. And both teams are starting to raise in their retros that this is becoming a big time sink. Okay, cool. So let's see what happens with this. Team Ignis now have already started to learn how to have retrospectives. They've identified this problem and they decided, cool, we should try some trunk-based development. Let's come up with a plan. Let's take it to Team Aqua and let's see if we can get on the same page. But Team Aqua, they just insist that actually the problem here is well, maybe it's Team Ignis, right? Maybe they're just making bad changes. And so when Team Ignis tries to suggest this alternate approach, they just get pushed back, and Team Aqua just insists, no, actually, there are no merge issues. There's no merge issues at all. It's just that you keep making bad changes. And if you stop making bad changes, everything will be fine. Well, that's strange. And Gilbert realizes, well, actually, we're currently in the same room that the teams have their retros in. So he gets up and he walks over to a retro board from a few days earlier, and he pulls off a sticky note. And the sticky note says merge issues, and it was raised by Team Aqua. But when this is noted, and Gilbert says, hey, you mentioned it in the retro yourself. You said we had merge issues. Team Aqua just insisted, no, what we really meant was that the other team is creating merge issues. Okay. So again, something to file away. Gilbert's learned something about these two teams. Team Ignis, they internalize issues. They seek resolutions for issues. But Team Aqua, they just externalize problems and they want to place blame. Okay. All right. So next story was becoming self-managing. So Gilbert is trying to get the team to become self-managing. So all these other issues that we've been talking about that he wants to solve, he also knows that there's an end date in sight, and he wants the team to be able to manage without him. So first things first, they should be able to run some effective Scrum events. And he knows that next week he's going to be on leave. So talks to the team and says, hey, I'm going to be on leave. How about you run the retro without me, and we'll see how you get on. Cool. So Gilbert goes away on holiday and he comes back. And on the day that he comes back, Team Ignis have clearly had a successful retro. This Scrum board has a few items on it that have come out of the retro, some plans for things that they'd like to change. And they've got one item, they need some equipment to help them with testing, and they need to get it from another team. And they say, hey, Gilbert, can you help us to get this equipment? Because we're not really sure how to go about this. Cool. Gilbert takes that on and thinks that I'm sure I can help. But a little later that day, when Gilbert sat at his desk, a developer from Team Aqua walks over, and he's got a big pile of Post-it notes. And he hands them to Gilbert and he says, these are for you. These are for me? Gilbert says, what do you mean? He says, oh, these are our retro items. Oh, okay. And Gilbert has a look through, and they have these vague statements on them, like, we didn't finish JIRA number 235 and testing wasn't finished. No plans for change, just a list of problems that apparently now belong to Gilbert. Okay, well, another thing learned, right? So we learned that Team Ignis is willing to own this Scrum practice, but Team Aqua really just wants someone to manage them. Last story, and I hope I'm not doing too badly for time here. So delivering quality. So Gilbert has been trying to help the team to deliver a high quality increment each sprint, right? We mentioned that right from the beginning, Gilbert noticed there were a lot of bugs being raised and closed, and that was being used as a metric of success. But now we want to try and build quality in. So he's getting the team to focus on shift left testing, right? Thinking about testing right at the beginning when we're refining the backlog and making sure that we build quality in from the start. More importantly, having the whole team be jointly responsible for quality rather than what Gilbert had been noticing, which is a separation between developers and testers that often led to issues just being thrown over the fence and not being addressed. So we're a few sprints into encouraging the team to work in this way, and Team Ignis, they've kind of understood it. They've started talking about testing, and even in a refinement session, they started drafting out a potential test plan for a piece of work that they were going to deliver, figuring out what failure scenarios might look like that they could create automated tests for. Great. And then during the sprint, working together, testers and developers sat at the same desk, talking about quality as they're building the work. Awesome. Team Aqua, on the other hand, they're finding this a little bit harder. So they've stopped raising tickets for every bug. That's pretty cool. But now the testers are needing to come and talk to the developers when they find a problem to try to get it solved. And one day Gilbert sat at his desk and he overhears a conversation as a tester walks towards one of the developers and says, hey, you know that thing you just built? Well, I've just found this issue. You see, when you press this button twice in a row, the whole system crashes and you have to log out. And the developer looks a bit puzzled and says, well, there's nothing in the ticket about stopping it from crashing. But obviously we don't want it to crash, the tester says, right? If you press it twice, it crashes and you have to log out and the whole thing starts again. It's a bit rubbish, right? And the developer says, well, if we didn't want it to work that way, it should have been in the ticket. It was built that way deliberately. You're not supposed to press the button twice. Just don't press the button twice. And again, the tester, thinking about the conversation we've had, we care about quality. I'm going to push a bit harder. No, remember what Gilbert told us, right? We want to care about quality. We want to build it right first time. And the developer puts on their headphones, turns away, gets back to coding, and just ignores the tester entirely. Not great. As you can imagine, the tester was a bit distraught, and they walked away, maybe looking like they were trying to fight back a few tears. maybe it's progress, but certainly things weren't great yet for Team Aqua. But again, Gilbert filed away, learned a few things. The Team Ignis, they kind of get this idea of collaboration. They care about quality. But Team Aqua, they just kind of want to do their bit regardless of quality. So after a few months, obviously we've gone through all these situations. Gilbert's been filing away some of these problems, and he decides, well, I need to do some root cause analysis, right? I need to figure out where all this is coming from. And so while he's digging in and figuring out where these problems are, they all seem to lead to the same place, he realizes. So Team Aqua disliking change, wanting to be given tasks, they want to place blame. Every one of these, when inspected closely, Gilbert realizes, oh, these trace back to Manny the manager. And you might remember this slide from back at the beginning that I was talking about when day one, Gilbert was figuring out what's interesting about these teams. What Manny had said was, well, Team Aqua, they're great. They're the ones I can go to all the time and they'll do what I want. But Team Ignis, don't really like them so much. I'm going to ignore them. And what this actually meant was that Manny, the manager, had many expectations of Team Aqua. He was always around, he was always involved, and he was always asking and controlling what they were doing. But Team Ignis, he didn't have any expectations of. He largely just ignored them and let them get on with what they were doing. And this might be one of the reasons that things were so different. Because it was Manny that was rewarding Team Aqua for sticking to the plan, responsible for performance reviews, monthly one-to-ones. He was the one praising them when they completed tasks, regardless of whether those tasks created customer value. He's the one that goes away when he's come to the team with a problem and they blame someone else for it. He'll just go wherever he's sent. And Manny's the one that's always watching, knows everything about the platform, and most importantly is the one that's grading the team on their individual end-of-year performance reviews, particularly separately as test or developer, not as a team responsible for a combined outcome. So I'm not saying that in every scenario it always comes down to one person, but the one thing Gilbert did notice was that there was this expectation that seemed to be really, really important, because in most cases, lots of people talk about this idea of culture and behavior, right? Which one comes first? It's a bit of a chicken and egg scenario. Behavior turns into culture, culture informs behavior. But the thing that Gilbert noticed was that it was expectation that always seemed to turn that behavior into culture, made it something that was much, much harder to change, because Manny, the manager, or maybe other people, were expecting the team to behave in a certain way and reinforced it. So the thing that Gilbert realized was, well, actually what we need to do here is break that expectation, right? We can focus on all these individual behavioral things as much as we want, but as long as that expectation exists, culture is going to be what culture is. And so Gilbert starts getting to work on a few things. First thing, respecting team autonomy. Gilbert had a conversation with Manny and helped him to understand how this was impacting the teams, his expectations and what that meant for their behavior, and asked Manny to stop attending team events, stop spending so much time with Team Aqua in particular, and allow them to become autonomous teams. Gilbert could have a conversation about rewarding outcomes, so delivering on sprint goals, delivering value to customer, not just number of tickets closed and certainly not number of bugs closed. And we could measure those things too. So how many features could we be delivering to customers, Gilbert thought, right? This is a thing that we really care about. Let's get rid of all these other metrics that are creating inverse expectations. And potentially introducing WIP limits too. Gilbert realized that developers and testers would have to work together if there wasn't actually enough work, that they could all just be working on one thing at a time. And so that was another way that expectations could be changed. So I wish I could say that all those things just changed everything overnight. They didn't. But what Gilbert did realize was that a glimmer was starting to appear by making these expectations different, by changing things around. Team Aqua did begin refining the backlog, thinking about custom problems, because they knew that come sprint review time, they'd be asked whether they delivered on a sprint goal. They started looking for pieces of work that they could actually deliver in a sprint, because again, they knew that was something they were going to be measured on. And they started solving problems inside a sprint, because they knew that, again, no one else was going to be there to solve it for them, and that was going to be the expectation come sprint review time. More importantly, they had to do all this stuff as a Scrum team, not with Manny, the manager, looking over their head. So yeah, that's the condensed version of the story. Between you and me, I'll let you in on a little secret. That's all based on a very, very real situation. In fact, Gilbert was me. I was the Scrum Master in this organization working in these two teams. And this is what I learned from trying to use the same coaching practices in two different teams, is that ultimately culture is the thing that makes the difference, right? If the team culture isn't actually ready for and prepared for change, then Scrum coaching techniques are probably going to fall flat. And if you really want to trace this to its root and solve the problem, then have a look and see where your expectations are coming from and see if those things can be changed. So that's my long series of stories. I hope there was some interesting stuff in there for you. I would love to hear any questions that anyone has, or if there's anything in there you'd like to know more about. I will throw the floor back over to everybody else.
Sure, can I ask a question? Thank you for the story. So how did Manning, the manager, take it when you essentially said he was the source of all the problems?
Well, you might guess that perhaps I didn't go in with quite that language.
Oh, okay.
But yeah, so to be honest, he was actually really like he understood, like he realized that he had been very, very close with the team, and that what he was doing might be affecting them. And when it was just framed as, hey, we want a team that's self-managing, right? And we know that that's something that's going to create results. He did kind of intrinsically understand that, and he had just been working in this way for such a long time that he hadn't realized. And I think that because Gilbert, or me, did try to just take it as a, hey, this is some of the stuff that's currently happening. Here are some of the ways that perhaps your behavior is informing that. Do you agree or do you disagree? And for the most part, he agreed and agreed to therefore change or try to change some of that behavior. So.
Did you manage to change how the team Aqua is behaving and performing and all that kind of stuff?
A little bit. So by the time I left, they certainly weren't a super high performing team, but like a few of the things I mentioned there at the end, the ball was rolling. You know, you could tell that they were starting to move in the right direction. And I like I say, I think it all just came down to the fact that the expectations were changed. So they knew every sprint review that we were going to be asking, did you achieve a sprint goal? Did you deliver something to the customer? And that's all we cared about. And so they at least were starting to try to solve the problems that were preventing them from getting there, rather than just reporting on all the bugs that they'd fixed. So
I have another
Cool.
question.
Go ahead, Amy.
So my question is, what happened after you left?
that is a great question. So the last I talked to Pete, just to be clear, I did change all the names of people just so that I don't get anybody in trouble. But last I talked to Pete, the product owner, so Team Ignis had absolutely just taken off, and they were regularly every sprint delivering value to customers and doing great. Team Aqua, maybe every 3 or 4 sprints, were managing to get something to a customer. Still a lot of conflict, but they were improving. Manny, the manager, still sometimes, you know, letting his nature come through and needing to be helped a little bit. But thankfully, I also did have the opportunity to recommend a Scrum Master to replace me for the full-time position after I left. And so they did get a lot of ongoing support as well from an experienced Scrum Master. It just wasn't me.
We have a hand up.
Oh, yeah.
You're on mute.
Okay. Yeah. Great story. That was really interesting. I've never worked as a part of a Scrum team, but I'm a developer, so I think I need to quite soon. So one of the things I read about was the culture, the cultural difference between, you know, traditional development process, waterfall process, and what's required for an agile process. So collaboration and teamwork. So you know, as you were telling the story, I was thinking, you know, these you know, more mature guys in is it Alpha Team? No, not Alpha. Aqua Team.
Yep.
I'd have thought that they'd read, you know, at least read what agile was about. Read that, you know, what culture, what you know, it was about, you know, working as you know, an autonomous team. Did they know what was required, but they just they weren't interested in it? They weren't interested in, or they, you know, what do you reckon?
Yeah, so I think it's a bit of both. So obviously for the sake of telling the story, I simplified things a little bit, so it wasn't necessarily you know, everyone in the team. So I think there were a few people in the team that kind of wanted to move in that direction, but they were struggling to get buy-in from everyone else, and so they'd maybe given up on trying to some extent because they hadn't been able to have the influence they'd wanted. And then there were other people in the team that basically just thought that this whole thing was a bit of a fad. And this is one of the things that interestingly can happen. I'm sure some people on the call have experienced this, is when teams have been in one place for quite a long time, they kind of don't realize what's going on in the rest of the industry, and they don't realize how much things maybe are starting to change. And so I think I don't know if anyone on this call would disagree with it, but my personal opinion is that working in some sort of an agile way, a collaborative, cross-functional way is the way of the future. Some people maybe just still think that it's a trend that's going to pass. And so, you know, sooner or later, we have to help them to understand why it's great, not just for the organization, but for them as well. So,
Thank you.
Martin, I
Martin?
think you've got a hand up.
Hiya. Yes, so sort of following on maybe some observations afterwards or in other places, but and I know in your story you're saying that they're all in one place. Have you sort of seen like that sort of situation occur since or anywhere else with more sort of remote working, or is it sort of bound by sort of being in an office and building up those sort of cliques?
Good question. So it's hard to say for sure, right? I'm sure that there's always going to be an influence in both directions. So that story, interestingly, was a team that I was with when we went into lockdown, or at least one lockdown. This was back in New Zealand when I was there, and so we kind of did a bit of both. There was some in person, there was some online, and then there was some hybrid. But just for the sake of the story, I kind of simplified it to the in-person stuff. I think the thing that I've learned since, and even with that team, is that it is harder to solve problems with things like expectation when you're not in the same place. Because, for example, it's much harder for me to see Manny, the manager, walking up to the team and having a conversation with them, right? So you don't necessarily see a lot of the stuff that's happening. So I tend to be a lot more investigatory, I guess would be the word, when I'm working with teams that are online, right? So you have to do a lot more probing questions, a lot more trying to figure out why people are doing what they're doing, because you won't necessarily see what you would see otherwise. But I'm still learning, as I'm sure everyone else is, right? Because this whole online working thing, still lots of challenges to overcome.
I think Mike posted a question in the chat as well.
Yes,
So,
and I think a lot of people, actually, and myself as well, said that we were thinking about the same question. So, Mike, do you want to ask it?
did you ever consider mixing the teams up? Is that the one?
Yeah.
Yeah, so interesting. That conversation came up many times. So I think Pete, the product owner, was the one who was most, advocating most strongly for that, because he felt that it was potentially a case of one of the teams had just kind of started reinforcing all of each other's worst behaviors. And so it wasn't what we thought about. I was a little bit less sure, and I tend to lean towards teams should be self-managing. And so we did have some conversations where we asked, would you as teams like to reorganize? But the general answer to that question was no, because as you can kind of tell, there was quite a bit of tension between these two teams. They didn't really like each other. And so the idea of working together more closely, they usually would brush off. It's possible that might have been a better solution, to be honest. It's hard to say. I just didn't really want to push too hard in that direction. And if the teams didn't want it, I certainly didn't want to push it on them. So yeah, Chris, go on.
Yeah, thanks. So in the beginning of your story, you had said that Pete had like almost no control and Manny was kind of like running everything. So is it the case that by the time you were done, Pete really had the role of the product owner and had more control of the product backlog and the items that he wanted to see in it, rather than what Manny was just telling him to do?
So a bit more. I certainly wouldn't say he was a great example of a perfect like product owner in terms of accountability. So the main thing that we managed to change, particularly by asking Manny to be a bit more distant from the team, was that Manny would no longer be allowed to just come to the team and say, hey, I want you to do this. If he wanted something done, he had to talk to Pete first. Now, because of the nature of the hierarchy in there, and the performance reviews and all that kind of stuff, it was still pretty hard, if not impossible, for Pete to say no, but at least it did have to come through Pete, not go straight to the teams. And so when it was particularly bad, or Pete thought it was something we shouldn't be doing, he would sometimes maybe come to me. We would have a bit of a three-way conversation and try to push back a little bit. So not perfect, but certainly better than it had been.
Hi, can you hear me?
Hello.
Yeah, go Andy.
Hey, so just two stories from my experience. The first is early in my career, I was part of a team that, and this is pre-Scrum, pre-Agile, at least for us. And we became very close. We used to go to the cafeteria and eat together, and we got a reputation as we were called the lunch bunch. And eventually the CIO came to me and said, we have a problem because people think you're not open to allowing others to join you. And it's starting to percolate. We're hearing this. And I explained that absolutely was not the intention. We've always invited people. So we opened it up a bit more in an attempt to address that. But the thing that happened when that project that we were on together completed and we delivered, management approached us and said, I think we'd really like to break the team up and insert you into other teams so you can bring this thing, whatever this magic is, to the other teams. And I said, please don't, because I know how teams work. And it's the commitment to each other that makes the team. So unfortunately, they didn't listen. They split us up and it didn't have the impact that they intended. So I wanted to speak to something specifically that's, I think, very similar to your experience, Michael. At my last client, I had two teams. One team was a lot of people who were my age, mid-career, had been at this a long time, mostly doing waterfall type work. And the other team was young, eager, and the way I like to describe it is what I would call the A team were all leaning in and like almost fighting over the work that's on the table. Oh, I haven't done that before. I want to try that. Who's going to support me in learning that? Whereas the other team was like, they were sitting back with their hands folded, tell me what to do. I'm not going to do anything until you give me an order. And the results were obvious in terms of the way things were going to turn out. The A team was delivering consistently, arrived at a somewhat stable velocity, could predict when things would be delivered and were reasonably accurate. The B team, not even close. And it was always like a battle. They would kick and scream. So I think it largely comes down to a need to shift the mindset. And I think that's difficult work on an individual one-on-one basis to help somebody see that the current mindset that they have is getting in the way of their becoming who we need them to be.
Yeah, absolutely. No, thanks for sharing that story, Andy. And yeah, so I totally agree. And I guess I know we're going to have to take a break in a sec, so we're a bit low on time. But I guess just to kind of tie a bow around what you're just saying, because I like it, is using the Scrum answer, right? Is, well, this is what the Scrum values are all about. It's really it's about building trust in a team, right? And I think correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that's kind of a part of what you're getting at, which is the team has to trust each other for everything else to work. And I think Scrum tries to capture that with the Scrum values, and that's kind of the thing that we focus on. And while it wasn't kind of the core of my story, it was definitely a very strong element in what I was coaching at the time, right? Is trying to get the team to trust each other, and that is kind of the first thing that you need in place before any of the other stuff's going to work. So
absolutely.
Nice. Thanks for sharing. Cool. I'll
And
throw
if you
back to Christina
guys,
next. I know where.
I was
yeah.
just gonna say, if you guys don't mind, that was the last question, just because we need to move on. Thank you very much, Mike. That was amazing. I really enjoyed it. I can see from the questions that everyone really enjoys it. Okay, so I'll just share my screen again. But before that, I just want to mention, like, there have been some sad news. I don't know if you guys had a look on BBC, but unfortunately, like, London Bridge's Downs being announced. That means that Queen Elizabeth II passed away. It's been announced on BBC News. So
that's a significant moment.
It is. I've been because I wanted to make sure that, you know, we did make sure to give it time. I've been watching as it goes through, and it's I mean, the longevity that how many presidents of the US did she live through?
I checked the other day in the number of being just, yeah.
And so now we have a king.
Yes.
He coronated, so he's got a king and king designate, but he's not quite there yet.
True.
Well, he is being addressed as the king on the news, so he has that mantle.
Yeah, well, we're in this literally the word interregnum in between king periods. So that's why we have this London Bridge down, because this is the change of, and the government services are all kicking off to emergency status because of this change of rules and persona. And we hadn't had it in modern life because barely TV was off the ground when she got coronated. So, and now we've modern life, and it's information flowing at a million miles an hour, and that's also opportunity for risk and threats, national security as well. So, beware that this is an interesting time, not just because of change of people, but also change of all this stuff. So, and the pomp and ceremony that comes along. Forgive me, my great aunt, great aunt was the lady in waiting to the Queen Mother, so I had a little bit of.
Oh, that's really interesting.
Yeah, Lady Elizabeth Bassett. You can look her up. She was the sister of my grandmother.
Cool.
So.
Oh wow. Well, thank you very much for sharing. That's yeah.
I wasn't trying to say this is the thing. It's just that I had a little bit of family insight to the ways that things work. That's all.
Yeah. No,
it's really interesting. Thank you.
Very interesting. Yeah. Okay. And if you guys don't mind, let's take 5 minutes break just before we go back and being with Amy and listen to her talk. So yeah, for everyone, let's come back at 7 o'clock. Actually.
See you all soon.
Thank you very much. Okay, so welcome back. I hope everyone's back. Like, if you can give me a thumbs up if you're back and you're not on camera, or some kind of sign, just so we know that. Yeah, okay, I can see some. Cool. Okay, so we are moving on to the second part of our meetup today, and there is one question. So, why Agile Delivery is not a sprint? And if you want to understand why, Amy will tell us a little bit more about it.
Absolutely. I'm just going to share my screen. I'm going to stop your screen sharing.
Yep, I just stopped it. So over to you.
So I'm going to put it into presenting view. Right. Can you see my screen? Can you see Usain Bolt?
Yes.
Okay, cool. Fantastic. I realize this is going to be a bit of a mood shift, but hopefully I know that, the context is not the greatest at the moment, but hopefully that we'll be able to kind of get through it anyway. Cool. So I know most of us have worked in Agile or worked in software delivery before. And sometimes when you come into a project, you've got this idea in your head that you're going to be like Usain Bolt in this image, streaming out in front. Your deliverables are going to be there. You're going to be delivering value to customers almost before they've even thought about it. You're going to be meeting and exceeding the product owner's expectations. Everything is going to be zooming past with a massive grin on your face. And then all too often, you end up like this, flat on your back, knackered, teams experiencing burnout. You're not in that kind of good space. You're not able to deliver. You've got dependencies on your dependencies. And we've all kind of been in that situation before where what we thought at the beginning doesn't match our expectations halfway through. So what I want to talk about today is why Agile Delivery is not sprinting. Because I don't run for a bus, so I'm not going to ask my team to sprint. So what we're going to look at today is why our language matters. And then we're going to look at Agile and some terms in Agile which maybe could use a bit more scrutiny. And then we're going to talk about what can we do about it? Can we do anything about it? And how we can approach that. So the first thing I want to say is, does anybody know who this is and what this is? Put it in the chat, shout out. Got something. I am a donut. Correct, Chris. It is. It's JFK. This is JFK at a speech in Berlin where he famously said, "Ich bin ein Berliner." What he wanted to convey, his intention, was to say, I am a Berliner. I stand with you. Unfortunately for him, this is a Berliner. So the intent behind what he was saying was lost because he said he was a donut, which is not what he was intending. So that's one part of language. Another part is so this is important. His intention was lost. Another area that I think is important is at Christmas last year, I was with my fiance's family, and her father said to me, "So what do you do?" And I said, because at the time I was a Scrum Master. So he said to me, so you're a sportswoman. I am not a sportswoman. I mean, I don't run for a bus. I definitely am not going to get involved in Scrum. But because of the words that I was using, the clarity wasn't there. He didn't understand what I was saying. He didn't know what a Scrum Master was. He was a doctor before he retired. So as well as intention, sometimes that clarity isn't there if we're using jargon. And finally, this is perhaps maybe not as relevant to everyone, but there have been so many times when I've been out with some friends or out with my fiance, and the waiter will get to my table, and they will say, "Hi guys," there is nobody at that table who is not a woman. So what we need to look at there is inclusion. Is the language that we're using actually including everyone we're talking to? So for me, why language is important is it allows us to convey what we want to do, our intention clearly, so that everybody understands what we mean, that we're not using jargon, we're not using words that can be taken in a different way, and that we are including everybody that we're talking to in our audience. So for me, that's why language is so important. But why do we use those words in Agile that we do? So sometimes in Agile, we use some words to make sure that we're on the same page. If I go from team to team, everybody knows what a Scrum Master theoretically should do. It's precise. It's a particular accountability, a particular set of things that means, and it's a standard across the industry, theoretically speaking, as long as it's done well. So if we go back to the Agile Manifesto, what this means for Agile is, if Agile is about delivering products to customers by operating in an environment that does more than talk about people as our most important asset and actually act like people are our most important asset, using the word sprinting doesn't necessarily prioritize people's well-being. It's not something that is going to allow people to look after their well-being. Sprinting, according to the dictionary definition, is to go at top speed. But a sprint is really more about making sure that we know what we're doing and allowing for sustainable development, rather than running flat out, having your team all burn out and nobody getting anything done. So the difference between the intention and the meaning of the word is slightly nuanced and slightly different. What that means is, if we are using the word sprint without thinking about those nuances, it can be quite jarring, particularly if we're communicating to people who don't understand Agile concepts in the way that we do. So if we're talking to the stakeholders, or even if we're talking to members of the team who are new to Agile. So if we are talking to a new member of the team and we're telling them that we're going to be sprinting, they might feel that they have to go at top speed constantly in order to feel like they're performing well at their job. And that's very much not what we want to convey. So that's one example of how language could be used better in Agile. And for me, I think that that's one of the examples where you can see the intention behind the words and the nuance don't really marry up. Next example is the sprint review. So I have heard the sprint review called a sprint demo, a showcase, a show and tell. And this for me is an example of where clarity is being lost. So the purpose of the sprint review is to inspect the outcome and adapt and determine future adaptations. So that it's got a very defined meaning. But because it's sometimes called so many different things, and all of those have their own meanings. If it's a demo, that could be it's a demo to stakeholders, but we don't want them to tell us, to give us their feedback then, because that's not the right time. So there could be so many different ways that could be interpreted. So here it's a case of the clarity behind the very precise meaning of sprint review gets lost if we use a number of different terms. And finally, stand up. Now, this is my personal bugbear, because to stand up is to be in an upright position on your feet. And especially since a lot of us have moved to working from home, I don't think I've stood up for a single one of my stand-ups in the last 2 years. But as well as that, this is an example of where we can unintentionally exclude a number of members of our team, particularly those who maybe can't stand up. That's fair, Michael. If you don't stand up for an entire day, that sounds great. But what we mean...
I don't think that's healthy, though, just to put it here.
But what we mean by stand up is that it's the same time, same place, it's a chance to synchronize. We know within our community what that means, but the word that we use maybe doesn't reflect that so much. Obviously, because what it used to mean was a meeting where everybody stood up, so nobody took 3 hours ranting about their current problem. But that's where it came from. It's maybe not what we want to stick with. So the way that I like to think about it, and I don't always use this with different teams. I don't usually articulate this outside of in my head, but I think about it like hiking. You go at a sustainable pace. It's still hard work. You're still going uphill. You've got a goal. Your goal is the top of the mountain or the next mountain. You've got 2 to 4 week waypoints within a larger hike, maybe, but you as a team are getting there you're not sprinting, you're not going flat out, you're going at a pace which suits your team. One of the most important things that I was taught in hiking was to go at the pace of the slowest person. And that's a much better way to think about how we deliver, and how we deliver in a way that prioritizes our team's well-being. So whilst I do want to say thank you, I do want to say that as part of that, as I said, I don't necessarily always externalize this. One of the things that we can do about this is think about it. As long as we know amongst ourselves and we are interrogating the language that we use on, not necessarily on a daily basis, but to really understand the differences between the nuance and the words that we're using, and understanding where those discrepancies are, that allows us to have a deeper understanding and a more intentional use of language that allows us to help our teams deliver. So for me, I don't like using sprinting because that's not what I want my team to do. So thank you. That was it. I hope that was interesting. I'm going to stop sharing. I realized that was a lot quicker than Mike's, but I hope it was just a couple of thoughts that I had around language.
I do tend to ramble, Amy, so I'm sure that's on me.
I think it's also partly on me. I mean, yeah. Any questions?
Very cool, different approaches. So captures the imagination differently. Do you find yourself doing a lot of reframing in conversation, just with having a focus on language?
Yeah, and I will often actually bring it up with the teams that I'm working on. So if I'm working with a team and one of the things that they're struggling with is they're feeling like they're not delivering enough, I will talk them through like the words that we're using, the languages we're using, and how I reframe it, because I sometimes find it's helpful, and it goes back to that transparency thing. You know, I want to make sure that they understand why I'm thinking these thoughts.
So by example, somebody says, gosh, I feel terrible, I'm not delivering enough. I'm just not able to, I'm not able to focus. I haven't been, so I feel like I'm letting the team down. How do you frame something like that?
Well, firstly, I would really thank them, because that's a hard thing to be honest about. But also I would just say to them, you know, maybe don't think about it as you having to deliver. We have a goal that we're trying to get to together. And if we are a team trying to get to that goal, you're not letting everyone else down if they can't go, if you're not going at their speed. They have to bring you with them. And that's part of hiking. That's part of maybe not sprinting, but hiking. Mike, you put your hand up.
Yeah, sorry, I was just going to ask the next question, but I didn't want to interrupt your thought process or anything. So just because you mentioned the Scrum Master title as one of the language issues, and as I'm sure everyone here knows, there's like a endless battle in the Scrum Master community about what we should change that name to. If you could wave a magic wand tomorrow and change the Scrum Master accountability, what would you change it to?
Herder of cats.
I love that was chambered, ready to go in your brain. Brilliant.
I think you, Amy, told about it. Like, you can just get it like that.
There is a question here from, do I think stand-up is beneficial? No, but I think that daily Scrum is beneficial. Just a different way of phrasing it, but I agree that it's a really important event. I just would use slightly different language when I'm talking about it with my teams. Anything else?
What do you think teams will need to do so that they can set the right tone of how they should speak to each other and say everything, to each other, basically?
I think that a lot of that goes back to thinking about values and whether that's coming together as a team and looking at a charter, and actually making explicit, how do we deal with conflict within the team? Making sure that when we're raising differences of opinion, we do it in a respectful way. But making sure that the whole team is on the same page with that, and making sure that if somebody is feeling like they are being, that they're not able to speak their mind, that we address the psychological safety first, because that is the underlying thing, the underlying concept or attribute of a healthy team.
Yeah, thanks.
You would be a great teacher, Amy.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
No, you're welcome.
It's a hard job to do, so thank you. Yeah, one more question.
I think we have a heads up.
Yeah, that's me. Sorry. Yeah, Amy, that was just that was really refreshing to hear some of the things you said. I didn't catch the early stuff, but yeah, I kind of got every point. Yeah, safe, a team being, was it psychologically safe, safe place. I mean, most of the teams I've worked with in my life, not in agile teams, but generally there's a slight, working on the same team in the same department, but there's always a slight competitive, watch your back. Everyone has to watch their back, which is, I guess, doesn't work at all with, it's the opposite of what agile is about.
Absolutely.
So yeah, I think someone said I'd like to work on one of your teams as well, basically. So someone who
that's a compliment, thank you.
Yeah, that's it.
Cool. Anything else?
No, just I sent this. Sorry, I sent it over to you privately. But if you want to write, there's a good talk person on the circuit, conference circuit, Judy Rees, and she has a big thing about clean language.
Really important. Yeah, absolutely.
Forgive me, I'm very idiomatic and being Irish, and I end up confusing people because I say one thing and I mean another.
It's something that increasingly over time I've had to kind of make sure that I started to clarify even before I finish a sentence, and try to pull myself up when I do it.
Perfect, brilliant. Well, thank you very much, everyone, and thank you very much, Amy, for doing this talk for us. Let me we're towards the end of our first meetup. So I'll share my screen again. I don't know why. Basically, when I click like slideshow, the scan me like picture just disappears. I really don't know why. And I want you to scan the QR code if possible. So I'll just not like do it like on a presenter mode. Don't know what's happening with Google Slides. So if you guys can just scan the QR code. For those of you who eventually want to do it from the computer, I can just send a link in the chat if that's easier. We are really looking for feedback. Again, as I mentioned at the beginning, this is actually the first one of a series of meetups that we're doing. We're looking for improve. We'll be looking for a lot of new ideas. You know, like if something didn't work for you, please let us know. We're pretty flexible. Saying that, I would just give you a little bit of time to populate the feedback, but just would like to say thank you very much for being here today, and thank you very much for the engagement, because you've been lovely, asking a lot of questions. And as an Agile coach, I facilitate a lot of meetings, and I can tell you that there is nothing harder than facilitating something that the audience is quiet and you're just like that's awkward silence, like what should I fill it with. So yeah, I really enjoyed doing that today. So yeah, thanks. I'll give you 5 minutes for some feedback, if everyone can leave us something, and after that we'll speak a little bit about the next meetup.